David.
Thank you for agreeing to talk to us today. Obviously, this is not a normal setting for when we would do an interview. Tell me your name and tell me where we are.
I'm David Ditto, and I'm at this detention facility. I met my wife Karina. I was on vacation from school, my junior year in college.
She was his American dream, and she had always thought she would live in the United States with this handsome American.
Just a really amazing, beautiful, friendly, happy, faithful human being.
She was a relatively sheltered girl living in La Paz, Mexico, and she immediately fell head over heels for him.
The closer I got, the more I got to know her. There was something right from the beginning.
She loved her life. She loved her husband. She loved her children.
She was a beautiful, loving wife.
From the outside looking in, the Ditto family looked like it was the perfect family.
My wife heard stuff going downstairs. I heard a horrible falling down the stairs. Bang, 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 coming down the stairs. I jumped up and ran over and found Karina laying at the foot of the stairs.
When the paramedics walked into the house, Karina Ditto was laying on the floor in the foyer. She had her hands to her thigh, and she was covered in blood. Did you believe that Karina was going to make it?
I kept asking them, is she okay? Is she okay? Does she have a pulse?
It was a fall. It was suspicious. Karina had many bruises all over her body, and she had a laceration to the back of her head.
Were you ever violent with Karina?
No.
I don't believe that David ever hurt Karina. That's all just lies.
David Ditto controlled every single aspect of Karina Ditto's life.
This portrayal of her as being afraid of David, that's just not true.
They're making me out to be a monster.
Did you get anywhere close to having a physical altercation with her?
No.
So then what do you...
I'm Maureen Maher. Tonight on 48 Hours.
Shattered dreams.
Hours. We'll be back in 90 seconds.
Hi, Medical 323. What's the address of your emergency?
2011.
My wife heard stuff going downstairs.
When David Ditto found the lifeless body of his wife, 38-year-old Karina.
How old is she? I do not want you to hang up.
When first responders arrived at the Ditto home in Mira Mesa, a San Diego suburb,
I started asking her, what's wrong? What's wrong? Are you okay? Honey, are you okay?
an emotional David told them his wife Karina had somehow fallen down the stairs and struck her head on the tile floor.
She wasn't moving, wasn't talking, so I grabbed her and held her, lifted her into my lap, and was holding her and trying to get her to come to, and she didn't respond or didn't move at all.
Karina was rushed to the hospital, unable to breathe on her own. For 2 days, David and his family stood vigil as she clung to life.
And I was told that first day that she was brain dead. And that it was almost impossible that she would ever recover. Then, the next doctor or nurse, the next doctor would tell me, it's still the same situation. She's not going to recover. And
it was really hard. I think at first it was just so hard for him to believe. They had their life planned ahead, and it was just so hard to accept that this actually was happening.
Well, there was David's mother, Pat, couldn't believe what had happened to Karina, the beautiful young woman who had captured her son's heart 20 years ago.
This was the girl. This was the one that was going to be his wife.
It was the summer of 1993. David was on college break, vacationing in Mexico. On his way to Cabo San Lucas, he stopped in the tranquil resort town of La Paz.
Stopped to have lunch on the waterfront, and was parked in my car, looked across the street, saw a pretty lady with pretty eyes and a beautiful smile, and she caught my eye.
Karina was a shy 20-year-old girl.
She'd smiled at me once or twice, and I got up the nerve to go over and talk with her.
Would you describe it as love at first sight?
As close to love at first sight as you can get, I believe, yeah.
When she was 8 or 9 years old, she said that she wanted to date an American.
Karina's mother, Sylvia, owner of a beauty salon in Mexico, knew her daughter was instantly smitten with David.
At first, I didn't trust him.
Why?
He was too good looking, and I said no. It's not possible for him to fall in love with a person like my little girl. And I asked him, why her? She's Mexican and has different customs.
Karina spoke no English, and David spoke little Spanish. But often, love has its own language. The two sparked up a long-distance love affair through phone calls and letters, and within a year, they married. They first had a civil wedding in La Paz with Karina's family, and then a traditional ceremony in San Diego with David's family.
My stepdad Bill walked Karina down the aisle since her dad wasn't here to walk her down the aisle, and that was really special.
David's sister Maggie was one of Karina's bridesmaids.
It was a beautiful wedding. It really was. The pictures, and when I look at them now, I think, oh, Karina was so young. My brother was so young. I remember he had cut his hair, I think probably to please Karina's parents or her family more.
Newly married at the tender age of 21, Karina left her family and all that was familiar behind to start a new life with her new husband.
I really respected the choice that she made to come up here, leave all her family, come to a new country where you don't speak the language, you're not familiar with the culture.
How did she adjust to life here in the States?
There was some difficulty. It was completely different. She was nervous and like a stranger in a strange land.
While going to school to learn English, the newlywed was completely dependent on her husband.
And so he helped her a lot and kind of guided her at the beginning.
Karina devoted herself to learning everything she could about life in America, and she was particularly devoted to building her life with David.
Karina really wanted to be a mother. It was something that she knew almost her whole life. She wanted to be a mom, and she was really good at it.
In 1996, they had their first child, a son. A few years later, their daughter was born. As the couple was starting their family, David was also starting his career. He took a job as a lab researcher at the University of California, San Diego.
It was a little bit of a struggle. Didn't have a lot of money, but we had, enough to pay the bills and, have food and everything.
It seemed Karina was actually living the life she had always dreamed of as a little girl in Mexico. From the perfect husband,
We had great plans for this place.
to the perfect home that David spent years saving up for.
She wanted this house. She wanted this house, and David, made every effort to get this house for them, and they did. They were just the ideal family, and everybody thought so, and just, thought, what a wonderful family.
But appearances can be deceiving, as revealed in Karina's letters to her mother. Sometimes I don't know why I married him, wrote Karina. I'm in despair. As Karina Ditto was fighting for her life, David Ditto was describing to first responders the events leading up to and immediately after his wife's horrifying accident. Earlier that evening, the kids went to bed. Then Karina and David settled in for the night to watch Braveheart, one of Karina's favorites.
We got our snacks and candy and chips and drinks and stuff. And we were watching the movie.
At some point, they paused the movie so each could use the restroom. David used the bathroom downstairs. Karina went upstairs. David returned to the living room. What happened next was simply unthinkable.
I heard the cat screech at the top of the stairs, and I heard just a really noisy bang, 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 bang coming down the stairs. And I jumped up and ran over and found Karina laying at the foot of the stairs. and she wasn't moving, wasn't talking.
David says he grabbed Karina and pulled her away from the stairs. Kneeling by her side, he shook her. When she didn't respond, he began CPR. Finally, Karina started moving.
She was grabbing on me, trying to pull herself up, and I was holding her up, and then she just stopped moving. She just kind of collapsed and was laying there lifeless in my arms, and I didn't know what to do. I laid her back down, and I don't remember if I started doing CPR again or not, but I realized that I just didn't know what was happening to her.
And that is when David made that 911 call.
My wife wants to find downstairs. Can you go right away? Okay. Are you with your wife right now? I need to go get her.
It was just after midnight. First responder Lisa Challenger was on duty.
We were expecting to see a fall. We were definitely not expecting to see a cardiac arrest.
Karina's heart had stopped, and she was covered in her own blood from a gash to the back of her head. The amount of blood surprised the experienced paramedic, but it was the location of Karina's body that immediately made her suspicious.
The stairway was here, and the patient was over here, so you don't fall down the stairway and then bounce around the corner.
From the blood pattern around Karina to these scratches on David's face.
He said that when he was doing CPR at one point, she had come back too, and then he got the scratches on his face from that.
Lisa felt the scene actually suggested there had been an intense struggle, and that David's story didn't add up.
She had so much blood on her face that if he had put his mouth over her mouth, he would have had her blood on his face.
Given their concerns about David's behavior and the suspicious nature of the scene, first responders called the police. But here at the house that night, David repeatedly told them Karina's injuries were the result of a fall down the stairs. So police allowed him to leave the scene to be at his wife's side at the hospital. What the cops didn't know at the time is that over the years, there had been problems in the Ditto's marriage. When you fought, would it get verbally abusive?
There's only one time that I could recall, and it was, more than 10 years ago. Karina and I were arguing about something, and she was really upset, and she asked, I just want to know one thing. I want to know if I make you sick, or if I'm sickening to you. And I just said yes.
One of the few people who knew about the problems in David and Karina's relationship was Karina's mother. He wants to tell me what spoons I should use when it's time to eat. He wants to tell me how much water I should use to water the plants. He punishes me with money. He takes it away for months. Karina confided in letters to her mother that David had become impossible to live with, and that she wanted to leave. There's times that I don't even want to speak to him. I don't want him to touch me. I have to tell him that sometimes I can't stand the situation.
Would she have described you as controlling of her?
I don't think so. She had freedom to, do the things that she wanted to.
Were you strict with her about what she spent and where she spent it?
We were on a tight budget at times, and I managed the finances. So we didn't have a lot of money sometimes to spend on clothes or, going out to eat and things like that.
Did you make her pay you back for diapers and other goods for the kids?
I don't think so. I honestly don't remember for sure. I don't think so.
By 2009, their marriage had reached a breaking point.
I said, well, maybe we should look into separating, because she was clear that she didn't want things to continue the way things were.
But David Ditto wasn't about to give up on all that he had invested in his marriage and asked Karina for a second chance.
And what did you ask for a second chance to do? What did you want another chance at?
To do the things that she said that she missed from the way things were before.
According to David, their relationship did improve, but he noticed a change in Karina.
Did you feel like you were in charge of the relationship and now suddenly she was trying to be in charge?
I wouldn't say suddenly, but yeah, she was taking charge of some things.
Taking charge and continuing to assert her independence. For the first time in 15 years, Karina got a job working at a nearby department store. She was making money and friends.
She was very nice. One of the nicest people I've ever met.
She struck up a relationship with a young co-worker named Jonathan Moda.
So you were friends?
Yes.
Did you have a flirtatious relationship as well?
Yes.
it was flirtatious, but in like a fun way. It was just playful banter, just sexual jokes here and there and stuff like that.
Mona says their flirting never got physical, but it did get personal.
Did you ever text her a particular picture of your private parts?
Yes, I did.
Why?
She asked for it.
Mona also made suggestive comments on one of Karina's Facebook photos, comments that David read.
The comment was something like, "How about you and me?" Or "How about you and me, girl?" Or "How about you and me, baby?" Or something like that.
Did you think there was anything going on between them?
No.
But just a few months before, Karina's mother, Sylvia, says David worried that she was going to leave him. In August 2010, while visiting the family, Sylvia says her son-in-law turned to her for help, something David strongly denies.
He cried a lot and said Karina wanted to leave him. He told me that I have a lot of influence over my daughter and wanted me to speak with her and plead for her not to leave him. So I told her, give him another chance, my love.
The next time Sylvia would see her daughter was 7 months later. She says David only told her that Karina had been in an accident. It wasn't until she saw with her own eyes the seriousness of the situation.
I began to hug her, talking to her, telling her to please open her eyes.
After being in a coma for 2 days, Karina's life came to an end.
Were you there when they took her off life support?
Yes.
Did it seem impossible to you that your healthy wife had fallen down the stairs and now she was gone?
Yes.
From a fall?
It was unthinkable. Shocking, surprising.
Equally shocking, however, is what David Ditto did just 15 minutes before his beloved wife was taken off life support. With his cell phone, David took this photo of his once stunning wife, Karina. She'd been covered with paintings of her own handprints, and it was for a reason, says San Diego prosecutor Claudine Ruiz.
The only reason that I could come up with for why David Ditto took that photograph was as a trophy. To remember what he had done to her.
That he had the final word.
He controlled her life and he controlled her death.
What do you think caused Karina Ditto's injuries? Chat now on Facebook and Twitter.
I know what happened that night, and I know that I didn't kill her. I know that she fell down the stairs, and she obviously hit her head and hurt her head.
For veteran San Diego homicide detective J.C. Smith, Karina Ditto's brutally bruised body told a different story.
Karina had many bruises all over her body, and she had a laceration in the back of her head. She also had bruising and swelling to the front of her face, both of her eyes.
Smith says Karina struggled violently until the bitter end, so violent that it left marks on David Ditto.
That was consistent with domestic violence, with a fight, with a woman scratching and fighting for her life.
Reaching up and clawing?
Yes.
But if there was a violent struggle that night, wouldn't the commotion have woken up their 14-year-old son and 10-year-old daughter?
Both the children were upstairs sleeping. You would think that with all the noise of a struggle, with the paramedics coming, the firefighters responded with lights and siren, and all these men coming in with equipment to work on a victim, children never woke up. And David had access to narcotics, and we thought possibly he used the drugs on his kids.
Did you give your children anything that night to make them sleep?
No, absolutely not.
And what do you think about that accusation? That's a pretty strong accusation because it clearly implies premeditation.
It's baseless, like most of the insinuations and accusations.
By now, detectives were having a tough time buying any part of Ditto's story.
So these are the stairs inside the Ditto home. It shows 11 carpeted and padded stairs with tile floor at the bottom.
Now, I know that this photo obviously was taken a few months after the incident. Do you remember seeing any scuff marks along the side? The banister being pulled off, the railing having any sort of marks on it, any blood anywhere around here?
Just a few days after the homicide, we inspected the walls and the railing and the floors and the carpeting. There was nothing. No blood on the carpet at all. The railing was fine. No damage, no problems at all.
Investigators also say one of the most disturbing red flags was this large bruise found on Karina's thigh.
I think David stomped on her and kicked her. And that right there really made me and the other detectives think that we're dealing with an assault and not a fall.
Were you ever able to find a shoe that matched that in the house?
We didn't find a shoe that matched perfectly.
Detectives may have strongly suspected David Ditto was lying, but they needed more solid evidence. And they got it from the San Diego County Medical Examiner, Dr. Otha Mena, who says Karina Ditto did not accidentally fall down the stairs. Instead, Dr. Mena says she was beaten and strangled.
There were too many injuries to be explained by what we were told happened. Therefore, I had to find what it was the reason her heart stopped. And in my opinion, it's because she was asphyxiated either by strangulation or by smothering, while also being beaten.
3 days later, David was arrested. Visibly shaken at his arraignment, David Ditto went from a grieving husband to a man charged with his wife's murder. David's mother, Pat, couldn't believe it.
When the judge stated that the medical examiner had said blunt force trauma and strangulation, we hadn't dreamed of that at all.
Before March 12, 2011, there was no known history of abuse. No physical abuse, that is.
In Karina Ditto's life, it was more about power and control. It wasn't until she started to break free from that relationship that he lost control.
San Diego County Prosecutor Claudine Ruiz.
But he was not the type of abuser who would lose his temper and beat his wife. He was a cold, calculating man, and he made the decision to kill her.
When you hear these words, violent, controlling,
well, there was
jealous.
no violence. There was no violence.
These are not words that you associate with your son.
Absolutely not.
Even the one person who knew Karina best had her doubts.
Karina's mother, Sylvia, believed David's story at first, until she returned here to La Paz and began to think about all those letters from Karina and all those bruises on her daughter's body. Eventually, and somewhat reluctantly, Sylvia had a change of heart about her son-in-law.
Why did
he have the heart to cause a person so much harm? He could have returned her to me or divorced her, but not kill her.
Those letters may have suggested motive, but detectives believe it is the physical evidence that proves murder.
She had blood in her hair that had coagulated, and then the blood around her had already began to dry. Says to me that she had been down for a while. David had time to think about what he was going to do, if he needed to straighten up the house before the paramedics came, because he knew he was going to be under scrutiny.
And just like first responder Lisa Challenger, detectives were equally troubled by inconsistencies at the scene.
It's not consistent with the fall down the stairs. All the blood, everything is 3-4 feet away from the bottom of the staircase.
Here's the most unexplainable element of that story to me.
Okay.
When you look at the pictures, at the bottom of the stairs, there is no blood.
That's wrong.
David's defense attorney, Keith Ruttman, argues it's absolutely plausible that Karina's head landed exactly where David says it did.
You're saying this is where she landed, and there is a blood spot there.
Correct. And it depends upon how much blood you're looking at. Remember, if David is kneeling next to her, his pants had blood on them, that could have absorbed some of the blood. No one saw her fall, so you can't say how she fell down the stairs.
But every single one of the people that treated her and dealt with her, every single one of them said, these injuries are inconsistent with a fall.
And every day you hear of medical events that no one has ever heard of before.
So you believe that every one of those people was wrong?
Yes.
Every one of those people?
Yes.
And you then believe this was just a freak accident?
Yes.
But no one other than David knows for sure what really happened that night.
Did you strangle her?
No.
He fooled people. People don't want to believe that there was that side, that dark side.
It's not me. It's not true.
Karina Ditto was 38 years old.
She would have been 39 today.
As David Ditto's murder trial begins, prosecutor Claudine Ruiz wants the jury to focus in on the horrifying details of her version of this case.
She scratched at him with both hands, but he pinned her arms back, and he restrained her with his body. Then he slammed the back of her head, and her head started bleeding.
Ruiz marches witness after witness to the stand.
I do.
Forensic expert.
That rhythm, that's a complete dead heart.
Witnesses make the case that Ditto's story of a fall down the stairs just didn't add up. Medic Lisa Challenger.
And so for somebody to have fallen onto the tile surface, how come she was injured on both sides of her face and then the back of her head also?
But David's lawyer, Keith Ruttman, says the evidence points to an accident, refuting the police version of the scratches on David's face.
The first element they say is it just does not make sense that somebody who's being given CPR would even be able to move their arms and reach up and scratch. Because that's why you're giving them CPR. They're not breathing, they're not moving.
Right, but David testified she came to, so at that point you would imagine that he would stop giving her CPR, giving her the freedom to move about.
Ruttman says investigators came to the wrong conclusions because they did a sloppy job.
If you're conducting a criminal investigation into a murder of your wife by a husband while his kids are upstairs sleeping, you have to do it right.
In court, he tries to show the jury that procedures were not followed. The right questions were not asked.
Did you ever hear anyone ask him to explain how the blood got all over her body?
No, I never heard anybody ask him that.
The biggest oversight, Huffman tells the jury, was that the county medical examiner, Dr. Mena, did not have complete information when he examined Karina's neck.
And his immediate explanation is that's consistent with what we see in strangulation cases, so it must be strangulation.
What Mena didn't know, according to Ruttman, is that a resident doctor at the hospital accidentally punctured an artery in Karina's neck while trying to give her blood to revive her.
Never knew that arterial puncture had occurred, so was never able to discount that.
Ruttman says it was that puncture that caused her neck to bruise, not being strangled, as Dr. Mena testified. The puncture was discovered by Ruttman's star witness, renowned medical examiner Michael Bodden.
He reviewed the autopsy report and he reviewed all the medical record from the hospital, and he was the one who first noticed that there was a potential contributing source of blood from the arterial puncture.
How does he believe Karina died?
Well, his testimony was actually to be technically correct about it, was that her injuries were consistent with a fall down the stairs.
But Dr. Mena says he was aware of the puncture.
The defense believes that the mistake of the resident is the hemorrhage that you saw that you believed was strangulation.
No, it cannot be, because the two hemorrhages were separate. The hemorrhage that was because of the resident placing a line, that was down here by the clavicle. Mm-hmm. The hemorrhages that I saw were over here by the thyroid gland or by the voice box.
Karina's injuries tell a story, says Mena, about what happened to her that night.
What's the story you were able to piece together by the condition of her body?
Her body told me that she was beaten because she had way too many injuries to be explained by a fall downstairs.
And that is exactly what the jury heard him say.
But then Ruttman took a big gamble. He did something that is rarely done in a murder trial these days. He put David Ditto on the stand, so jurors could hear from David directly and judge for themselves if he was telling the truth.
Karina was here at the base of the stairs. Her head was on the tile floor. Her shoulders were flat on the tile floor.
And then he addresses a key point to the prosecution's case, how Karina's head got to where the blood was on the floor.
So I was holding her and I lifted up her head and shoulders and kind of just pulled her, and then just kind of took steps with my knees and pulled her several times until she was laying alongside the
Did you try to give CPR to Karina?
Yes, I did.
Was she moving?
No, she wasn't.
Was she talking?
No, she wasn't. I lifted her up, then held her in my arms. Just her head and her shoulders. And just say, honey, are you okay? I'm trying to wake her up.
Were you able to wake her up?
No.
David also got emotional when he acknowledged there were problems in his marriage, but said both he and Karina were working hard to save it.
We talked a lot and cried a lot. But she said yes, and she wanted to try again.
Jurors had to weigh David's testimony against that of Karina's mother, who told them of his controlling ways as described by her daughter.
For example, he wanted the plans at a certain time,
La comida a tales horas.
food at a certain time.
Teléfono tenía tiempo para hablar a nosotros.
The phone, she had set time to talk to us, call us.
Good afternoon.
In closing arguments, Ruttman tells jurors that even if there were problems in the Ditto's marriage, that is not enough evidence that he killed her.
What she would tell her mother, sometimes I feel like I want to be single again. Everybody feels that way. Everybody. At one point or another in your marriage, everybody feels that way.
And he says the fact that David Ditto's story is so odd is precisely why it had to be true.
You'd think if he planned all this, he'd have a better story put together. The blood would be in the right places. The injuries would be consistent with what he saw. That's not what he said.
And he backs up his point that it was a freak accident with some mathematics.
If it's a 1 in a million chance that Karina Ditto fell down the stairs and hit her head in just the right way, it's a 1 in a million chance. That means it happened to 311 people last year. 1,000 if it happens in China.
But Claudine Ruiz isn't buying any of it. She wants the jurors to believe it was cold-blooded murder.
This was no accident. And the bruises all over her body tell me that.
After 4 weeks of testimony, the case against David Ditto was now in the hands of the jury. His attorney, Keith Ruttman, was feeling optimistic.
I was confident that we had presented the best case that existed and that they had left too many unanswered questions for 12 people to conclude that David just upped and murdered his wife in the middle of the night with his kids upstairs.
Unlike Ruttman, David's sister Maggie was not as optimistic.
After our attorney's closing argument, that's when I felt worried. Our closing argument just was not, it didn't drive the points home.
It took only 1 day for the jury to reach a verdict, and that made David's mother, Pat, very nervous.
I felt that because they came to a decision so quickly, they did not consider all of the evidence.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, David Patrick Ditto, guilty of the crime of murder.
Guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict stunned everyone who believed David was innocent.
I never dreamed that they would find him guilty of first-degree murder. I mean, that was over the top.
I was shocked.
But no one was more shocked than the defendant.
I really didn't think there was any way I would be convicted. I didn't think it would be possible to convince a jury of 12 people that I killed her when I knew that it wasn't true, and I knew that some of the evidence, looked suspicious, and I saw some problems, but it didn't prove anything. It didn't prove that I hurt Karina in any way.
Was there a particular piece of evidence or someone's testimony that came to the forefront right away?
For me, it was the medical examiner's evidence.
We sat down with 3 of the jurors. Francine Fulman-Miso found that,
of her just seeing that because that was so objective and convincing for me.
Juror Christine Ellis.
Even though we had all the testimony about their relationship, everything, I was trying to go on the actual physical evidence that they brought forward. And it just didn't seem that they could possibly be from a fall down the stairs.
I lifted her up and held her in my arms.
Nor was juror Patricia Well convinced by Ditto's story.
I found his testimony disingenuous, and it seemed very disconnected from the context of the situation. I was troubled by that.
It's sad to think that someone went through that kind of pain at the end of their life,
Do you believe justice was served?
I do. Prosecutor Claudine Ruiz says the last chapter of Karina Ditto's life
may have ended very differently if not for the first people who stood up for her.
The patient sounds like her.
The paramedics were really the unsung heroes in this case because they arrived on the scene knowing nothing. When they walked in, they immediately knew something was wrong.
Is it possible that he could have gotten away with murder and called it an accident?
He very well could have.
I saw my role on this call as providing care for Karina Ditto. Every person that was involved in this had a part to it. I know that we were the first people to draw attention to it.
This is a tragic case.
9 months after David Ditto was found guilty of first-degree murder,
It's tragic for the victim. It's tragic for the children.
Judge Kenneth So sentenced him to 25 years to life. Now 45, David Ditto will most likely spend the rest of his days in prison. When the case against David finally came to an end, Sylvia was back home in La Paz, Mexico, where it all began for David and her daughter.
I felt guilty. Even today, I still feel guilty. Because had I told her to pack her things and leave him, this wouldn't have happened.
As Sylvia looks through a photo album full of memories, she hopes and prays she won't lose touch with the grandchildren she loves dearly, but has not seen since the trial.
It's very difficult when I speak to them on the phone. I can't control myself when hearing their pretty voice. They are not alone. They have a lot of family here, and we love them.
The children are now living with David's sister, Maggie, and her family.
You still have photos of David and Karina in your salon and all over your house. How do you feel about David Ditto today?
I only see him as the son who left. A son who made us feel good at one time. A son who behaved badly. But I have him in my heart. I don't hate him. I forgive him.
If you were on the jury, what would you think of David Ditto's emotional testimony? Chat now on Facebook and Twitter.
He's still in aircraft.
He said, stop, I'll shoot.
You right out there, do you see it?
He had been dead on the torso, his head was almost overkill.
Benji was from a rich Miami family. They owned the Fontainebleau Hotel.
He was a brat. He wanted people to fear him. He had the second largest Batman collection in the world.
And he had something else.
He had a lot of enemies. We found hitmen, we found girlfriends, we found money trails.
And when it was all over, the oldest motive in the world, money and sex.
Who killed Benji Novak? 48 Hours Saturday.
On television, online, on the go, and now on iPad. CBS News.